Hi, friends. In this episode, we're going to have a conversation about loss, grief, and fitness with Julia Steyer. Julia lost her husband in 2013 to a rare liver cancer when she was 28 years old. In the months and years afterwards, Julia continues to use her grief in a positive lifestyle change. She has been involved in NCAA athletics for 14 years and has continued to document her fitness, athletic, and grief journey in her heartbreaking and honest blog, The Unwanted W. Julia's journey has been featured in the U.S. Lacrosse Magazine, Soul Cycle, and The Guardian. She currently resides in Florida with her husband, who is referred as to regular guy on her social media accounts, and recently had her son in February. Julia runs the largest free widow fitness Facebook group called Widow Dark Fitness. If you're a widow and inspired by Julia's story, I encourage you to check it out. If you're like me and want to connect, know more, follow Julia on her journey, connect with her at her website, juliasteyercoaching.com, or visit her Instagram for health tips at Julia Steyer Coaching. If you're in the Pensacola area, visit Cycle Bar, where she is a phenomenal instructor, and I do know this from firsthand experience. Hey Julia, thank you so much for sitting down with me today to share your story and insight on some tough subjects.
Hey, Tesa, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to share my story.
I first want to say congratulations on your healthy pregnancy that I know was a little bit difficult. And having your little man, he is the
Oh,
cutest.
thank you.
I love seeing him on your Instagram and your fitness and your workout on how after pregnancy you're on this new journey. But I first want to share how we know each other. So, Julia was my first ever cycle bar instructor of any type of cycling event. And I started at a time in my life where I had zero confidence. I fell in love with cycling, not only to the loud music, the dark room, but with Julia in a non creeper way. She self disclosed little bits while motivating the room to keep going. And I'm a naturally curious person, but when I heard her story, I was like, I gotta know some more. So I did Google her, I added her on social media, and here we are.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I remember you came in. I think you got like second that day too. It was like your first class and you came in second in the class. That's awesome.
Yeah, thanks.
I love that stuff. It like fuels me up. And then you learn that I have like a ridiculous memory. So who remembers like that little?
Well, thanks. It makes me feel good.
Yeah. But yeah, I always talk about I got into fitness because I was a Division 1 athlete, but I gotta be perfectly honest, I wasn't the most hardworking athlete. I was one of those people that kind of skated by simply because I was talented and I knew what to do on the lacrosse field. I wish 100 times I could go back in time and have the work ethic that I do now back then, but sometimes you got to fall on your face to get back up.
Yeah.
And when my husband passed away in 2013, I was not very healthy and I hadn't been healthy for several years. And then I recently watched this documentary. I was a comedian who lost a lot of weight. One of the pieces of advice he gave you is like when you look in your mirror and you say, I hate you, that's when you could start making the change. I actually laughed pretty hard because I remember after my husband died, I would look in the mirror and I hated the amount of self-loathing that you go through grief is indescribable. And I remember waking up every day, empty bed, empty apartment, going to work, crying in my car the whole way. Before I went into work, I took anti-anxiety medicine. it's one of those ones that it takes at least 8 hours to get out of your system. So I was like, I knew I was at work for 8 hours until I was safe to go home. And I remember just always hating it. And one day I was like, just hated myself so much, I decided to go for a run. And then I kept doing it every single day after that. And then I started going to cycling classes, started making a change just for a healthier lifestyle because I wanted to become someone else.
Yeah. So, how old were you and where were you working when your first husband passed away?
I was 28 years old. I had actually just turned 28. My birthday is November 2nd. And he died on, it was a Monday. It was November 25th. And it was 5 days before my 10-year high school reunion. So it was just like all these things were in motion that like that's like one of those details that it's so frivolous to even remember, but I do remember that it was like 5 days before that. Anyways, he died when I was 28 from a really rare liver cancer that kind of started taking a turn for worse over the summer. And we were supposed to get married in October of 2013. So we weren't married for very long, but we had been together for 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And his cancer got worse, and we made the decision to basically elope because it was inevitable that he was going to die, but I didn't want to not be allowed in the hospital room and if we weren't married. So that's ultimately why we decided to elope, because there was a reality that he might not be alive for the wedding.
Mm-hmm.
And so he died, and I was 28, and I had no idea. I was in denial for a really long time because you know how there's like the forms of grief. First is
Mm-hmm.
denial. I was in denial, I would say, probably for several months before he actually died. I never thought he was going to die.
Yeah, I can't imagine. So, was this, you said it was a rare cancer, but how far in advance were you guys expecting this? Or did it just come out of nowhere and it went really fast? Or what was the timeline like?
So my husband and I, we met in 2008. We were in grad school together, and we kind of just were friends. And I didn't know he had cancer. He was actually at that point battling his cancer, and I had no idea because, I mean, that's not something you bring up, I think, at a coffee talk with all your friends.
Mm-hmm.
So we became fast friends and we started dating. And when we started dating, there was one afternoon he was like, "Hey, I got to go to the hospital for a quick checkup." And I was like, "Okay, that's normal, I guess." Because, I mean, you never know what's going on in people's lives. So I was like, "Oh, maybe he just needs to get medicine or whatever." I was very naive. And
Mm-hmm.
we started dating. And about 3 months into dating, he was like, "Oh, by the way, I have cancer." And so that was a shock. But while we were together, his cancer went away. Like they took care of it. It was, what is it, remission?
Uh-huh.
And it was July before he died. It came back with a vengeance. And it was really fast. Like it was July. We were out to dinner, and I was like, "Boy, are you looking yellow?" Because it's liver. So he had jaundice.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, "Oh, do I?" So that afternoon after we had breakfast, he went to the hospital, and they were like, "Oh wow, like there's a tumor that's blocking your bilirubin." So they had to take care of that then, and then he kept going in weekly for checkups. And then in September, we both got sat down with a social worker at the hospital to talk about what to do as far as if he were to die. And I was like, "What do you mean he's going to die?" And then I think a day later we eloped.
Oh my God. I like, it's
Yeah.
just giving me chills everywhere thinking about it.
It's crazy because it's like I was planning a wedding while he was also like dealing with having cancer. And it's one of those things where the brain is so amazing just because of how well you compartmentalize. And I was also coaching women's lacrosse at Drew University at the time. I was the head coach. And so you also are getting ready for the school year. So I was like planning a wedding. My husband had cancer. I was taking care of like 25, 18 to 22-year olds, preparing for our season, fun, like everything you would do as if nothing was going on. And so it's really amazing how the brain can compartmentalize and almost protect itself from how bad things can get.
Yeah, so you were kind of living like, multiple different lives because you had all these different hats to put on. You had a coach hat and
Hmm.
you had fiance hat, and then you had to be there for him through this difficult time.
Yeah. And he was amazing because he never let on how sick he was. And I think with everything, I always say I definitely was in denial. Like my denial started, I think, in July when we found out it was like coming back. It's He never let on that he was sick. Like we would have events at my university, he would be there, like with a smile on his face, and no one could tell he was sick. Even like when he
Um,
died, my team had no idea. They were like, "What do you mean, Coach Julia's husband died?" Like no one knew, and I also didn't talk about it.
yeah, was there a reason why you didn't talk about it or?
I think death is very yeah, I think death makes people very uncomfortable.
Mhm.
And so I didn't want to, I guess when you're dealing with, I know when you're dealing with college kids, like if a boyfriend like cheats on a, cheats, it's like the end of the world. If they get a bad grade on a test, if a teacher looks at them side glance, like it's the end of the world. And I felt like I didn't want to put any focus on myself. And so not telling my team allowed me to be hyper focused on their issues, which I think actually made me a better coach. So that's why.
Yeah, to be there for them. So cuz it would kind of change the roles around.
Hmm.
If you were to tell them, they would, want to be there for you.
Yes.
Do you think that a reason why you didn't tell them is it would make it more real since you're in that denial phase?
I think so. And I also didn't want to be treated differently. I remember there was a handful of people I told at my university. Like I told my boss, the athletic director, I told him. I did tell, we had two assistant athletic directors. I told one of them because I believe his wife had died several years prior. And so it was one of those things that when you start telling people, you do see how their behavior changes with you. So like always like the check-ins, if like I'm upset, it could be something totally not related to my husband, but immediately the thought goes, oh, something must be wrong with her husband.
Yeah.
When it could be like, no, one of my players got caught smoking in the dorms and I'm pissed. Like there's there's things like that. And so I didn't want anything to disrupt my focus, which was at that point making sure my team was ready to compete by the springtime. And also, like, I just didn't want people to treat me any differently.
Yeah. And that was like your stability in your life was that because out of as far as your husband and everything that was going on with his cancer, that was all out of your control. But with coaching, you were able to,
Hmm.
that was more tangible.
Oh, yeah. I always say, like, it's crazy because the best year of my career as far as being a coach was actually the season after my husband died. And I'm actually looking at a picture of that team right now. I'm in my office and that picture still hangs up. So that 2014 team is like, uh, I get so like teary eyed when I think about that season and that team. They saved my life.
Why do you think it was your best year?
Well, it was just a year of change. And so, yeah, well, a big part of it is like, it gave me something to work for. It gave me something to wake up every day. And when you're dealing and reeling from death and grief, you can be happy like in the same breath, you can be happy, sad, frustrated, and like irascible. I use the word irascible for that because it's like it's not even angry. It's like it's a rage that is so volatile that you can't even cap it. That can all be in the same breath, but like that team helped me get up in the morning, stay focused, stay working towards something, and it got me out of my own head.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I had to be alone at that time, I do not think I would be alive today.
Yeah. So I relate on a different level just because I have depression and I've had it for forever, I feel like. But I don't know. I was in a slump one, like my darkest time, where I couldn't get out of bed. I literally just wouldn't. And it was right when I met my husband, Dustin. And I try to think back at, what got me out of bed, what kept me going. And a lot of it was just, I wanted to prove myself wrong. I didn't want to be a statistic because I mean, I definitely could have been not here anymore. That's where my dark place was. So what kept you going during that time? But with your team, they kept you out of your head, but what was that big decision that, cuz you had two choices, to get up and to be a coach and to be there for your team, or to stay in bed. And what was that big motivator where you're like, okay, let's just get up?
Well, I had 5 o'clock practices. That was one big thing. um, like those early morning practices. But it was just the overall, like, they showed me love, and I lost love, right? And so
Mm.
grief is ultimately love that's turned inside out. And so you have all this love inside of you that you don't have a place to put it, because the person you were giving it to is no longer around. And of course, like, I mean, I still have all that love, and you can simultaneously still love the person who died and love many things in your life and move forward with it. But at the time, I couldn't understand that. And so I had all this love to basically give, and they showed me love back. And so I just wanted to, like, pour my heart out to them. And so I felt one part of showing them love is always showing up, and they always showed up and worked hard. And not only that, but I had one player on the team who was super injured. Like, she had physical therapy, like school, she also worked, and she didn't necessarily have to be there at 5 a.m. because I knew she had her physical therapy later in the day. She would come to the 5 a.m. practices, and she always, in her hand, had a cup of coffee for me. And I cannot tell you, like, coffee is my favorite drink now. Like, and it's all wrapped up into, like, that season, just the amount of growth I had to go through, understanding, I think, that your life doesn't, so to speak, end when someone else's life ends. And they were just a light for me to kind of keep traveling down the path.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's why, like, that team is my best season. I just love them. I still stay in contact with most of them. And they also helped me raise, I think it was $30,000 for cancer research. And so that was pretty, I mean, it just shows the depth of how much they cared for me. And especially when you're in a situation at work, you don't realize how much people care for you until something so jarring happens in your life that you find the support that you never really knew you had.
Yeah, I love that. I love that how you said it, that you had all this love to give, and then you were used to getting love back. Because I think a lot of the times we don't realize that. We don't realize, what we have, and yours was taken away, and they're like family. They just came in and scooped you up, and they just gave you all the love, and they knew exactly what you needed. I love that.
Yeah. They also helped me get back. Like, I talk about fitness a lot, and fitness was a big part of my grief journey. And part of it is because I was so unhappy. Like, I was like going home after, like, work. I had a 2 beer limit because I still cannot drink because I lose control of my emotions. But I had a 2 beer limit. I would go home, have my 2 beers, go to bed, wake up, and do it every day. Those girls started asking me if I, like, wanted to work out with them. They'd be like, "Hey, coach, like, do you want to go for a jog?" And I was like, I'm not good at jogging, but okay. And so we would go for a jog. And not only that, the men's lacrosse players, they also would come to my office, check in on me, and ask me if I wanted to go for a jog and stuff like that. And I think it was just like a way of them expressing that they do care. And I don't think they did it to be like, oh wow, like she's really overweight, we should get her to lose weight. I don't think that was it. I think they're 18 to 22. Like, how do you deal with an adult who's really upset? And
Yeah.
they were just like, I don't know, let's get her to do something.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, earlier you talked about how you looked in the mirror and you said that, you had this feeling of hate and you just went out on a run. So, where in that between being a coach did that fall into place?
Well, I saw my team working really hard, and I had an awesome assistant coach. She's still one of my best friends. She sent me, when she found out I was pregnant, she was like quick to start sending me like a buttload of things because she has 2 kids. But I just saw how hard they were working, and they were showing me a lot of love and compassion. And I would go home with so much, it was hate. It was absolute self-loathing. And one day, my assistant and I were actually in the office, and we were invited to a fitness class by one of the other assistant coaches, one of the baseball coaches, and it was Soul Cycle, which is like the rival to Cycle Bar, um, which is kind of funny. But there was no Cycle Bar where I lived in 2013 in New Jersey, so
There
it was
you
only
go.
Soul Cycle. But I would have went to Cycle Bar. And so he invited me to a class, and my assistant and I went. We loved it. And then we also realized how out of shape we were. And of course, like when you're coaching a college team, you got to make sure they're in shape. And we're never satisfied. We always think they can do better. And so conditioning, like we'd be pushing them, making them go a little bit harder, a little bit faster, getting really outside the comfort zone. And then after practice, my assistant and I would go and we would work out together. And so sometimes it would be a run, sometimes it would be a walk, sometimes more than often we would head to Soul Cycle. And that's how I got started in getting losing weight, getting in shape, and feeling more confident with myself and where my life was heading.
Yeah. When did you feel that your stage of grief was changing? Because there's, that shift of each stage of grief. So at this point you're past the denial, and where did you see that shift to where it started feeling a little bit better?
I know there's the stages of grief. I don't think they're linear. I don't think you go from like, was it denial to anger,
Mm-hmm.
bargaining, like depression, acceptance. I don't think I ever hit bargaining. I don't know what, like I don't understand that. So, and I also don't think the anger I felt was towards myself. It was never outwardly towards anyone else. So I don't feel it was a linear process, but I do remember I had a huge mental breakdown in early in the season. I think it was March. The Guardian, the international like online magazine newspaper, picked up on this. That's why I got featured in it.
Mm-hmm.
Because I had my online blog. I was starting to write in it a week after my husband passed away, and I kept going with it. And US Lacrosse picked it up, and then the Guardian picked it up, and Soul Cycle picked it up too. And it was in March. I didn't want to get off the bus. We were playing a team, Scranton, and it's in Scranton, Pennsylvania. My husband and I, we met in the Scranton Wilkes-Barre area, and it was this was less than 4 months after he died. And I always tell people, I'm like, imagine having to go to the place that you met your spouse like 4 months after they died.
Yeah.
There's many widows, widowers, people who have lost like boyfriend, girlfriends, who can't even go back to the place that they met them, let alone their favorite restaurant. And like after 4 months, I had to go back. Like there was no choice. It was we had a game, I had to go. And I didn't want to get off the bus. I remember giving starting lineups, crying. I was in the gym crying. I called my dad, crying on the phone. During warm-ups out on the field, I locked myself in the bathroom crying. And one of my players came and knocked on the door, and she was just like, can you move your ass so we can win this game already? And I was like, yeah, exactly. Like, it's one of those things where like you're so stuck in your head. And like it was that snap where I was like, oh yeah, there's a life outside of like me that needs to continue. Like there's so much more that has to happen. And we went out, we won that game, and it was one of the best and worst games that I've ever experienced. But it's weird because life isn't measured in wins and losses. But for me in that time, it was, because you won a game or you lost a game. And that one was an overall mental victory. And I felt like it helped me get a little bit further on dealing with loss, dealing with having to reroute and reestablish my life without my husband.
Yeah. So that was like one of your life markers that it was after that, you think?
Yeah, after that, I came back. I felt a little braver. Like nothing, you know how when they talk about, what is it, teenage
Mhm.
invincibility? It's like one of those things that happens because like what is it, the frontal lobes aren't developed yet. I had that after that. I felt invincible after that moment. And as the months went by, I felt always a little bit stronger. And I also felt like I had a really strong support system that wanted me to, you know, figure and learn how to live life with, like, through loss.
Yeah. I'm just trying to process it all. I can't, I mean, I try to relate a lot, and relating to that, it's heartbreaking.
It is heartbreaking, and it's one of those things where it's like it sets you up. Like I joke about it. It's like I'm an optimistic pessimist. Like I think about like the worst situations that can happen before like I enter into something. Like when I was pregnant, like the pregnancy was tough, and going until like we had to schedule a C-section because I had low-lying placenta issues, so I couldn't give birth naturally. And of course, like in my head, I'm like, what if I don't wake up? What if I bleed out? What, like all those things.
Mhm.
And like my current husband was like, why do you think of these things? And it's because of having the worst thing that could possibly ever happen. You start moving forward being like, well, what if this happens? Let me think of the worst possible thing that could possibly happen. And when it doesn't, I'll be appreciative.
Yeah, just kind of preparing yourself,
Yeah.
because you've been through it. You know that the worst can happen.
Yeah.
So it's not out of the question. So let's fast forward a little bit. I want to talk about your relationship with your current husband, and how that, starting a new relationship after having your husband pass, I know that couldn't have been easy.
No, this is actually kind of funny. So I met my current husband in Alabama, and grief is funny because there's things that they say not to do, like don't make any big life decisions in the first year of grief. So I didn't. And I ended up moving to Alabama. I took a job. So I had this like awesome job at Drew University, and I was so out of my mind with grief still after 18 months. Like later, I thought like I was feeling good, doing well career wise. Let me take this job at the school I've never heard of. So I ended up moving to Alabama on a grief decision. And I think it was like the first 2 weeks there, it was hotter than Hades. I could not deal with the humidity. I was crying. I was like, I made such a terrible decision. One day I went to the dog park, and my dog ran up to a very handsome man, and he turned around, and I was like, I'm going to go sit next to him. And so that's how I met my husband. And again, I didn't think, I don't know how to describe it because it's not like low self esteem, but you just don't think anybody would want to be with a widow. Like, as you get older, we all have a ton of baggage, and that's just the way it goes. But to be in your 20s and be like, yeah, I'm widowed, that's like the ultimate baggage. In my head, it is. And I'm sure there's people who are like, oh, no, that's not. But until you're faced with it, I would say, I was like, oh, I would never date a widower. You guys are crazy. Um, but we started dating, and I remember he was just like, how are you not wifed up? And I was like, oh, I was married. And he was like, what? He was like, oh, you're divorced? And I was like, no, my husband's dead. And I remember I said it with like a grin, and he was just like, you're insane. But it's one of those things where it's like, I wasn't grinning because I was like happy about it, but it's like self deflection,
Mm-hmm.
being like, yeah, like my husband died,
Yeah,
like ask me about it.
that's totally my thing. Like, a lot of people say I have a dark sense of humor, but it's really,
Yeah.
I mean, like, I have to laugh about it or else I'm going to cry. So,
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what it is. It's like I was smiling while I was saying it, but it's like I saw this meme years ago, and it was like, when you have gone through such trauma and you're telling the story laughing, but everybody else is like mortified. That's
yeah.
like, that's just it. So, and he's military, so he's in the Air Force. And I didn't know this about him until later on, but he didn't flinch when I told him I was widowed. And so I always thought that was very peculiar, because I had gone on dates prior to that, and many people were like, oh wow, like you're too damaged to even like deal with. But he was just like, all right, well, do you want to hang out again? And so we kept hanging out, and I thought he wanted to be my friend. I didn't realize like he wanted to be like my boyfriend.
Mm-hmm.
And so we kept hanging out, and I mean, he ended up being my next big love.
Oh.
So, and I didn't know this until later on, but we met in August, and I think it was like in September. I remember he was really upset about something, and I was like, oh, why are you upset? And it was the 3-year anniversary of his best friend, who was a Marine, being murdered. And so it was one of those things where it's like, oh, you have dealt with loss, I have dealt with loss. Of course they're not similar, but when you understand and know grief, you can connect with people, whether it's a spouse, a best friend, a dog, parents, sibling. It's just one of those things that, like, whatever form, grief is grief.
Yeah. So, you think that's why he didn't flinch when you said that?
Oh yeah, I 100% think that's why. So, and I didn't know.
I mean, and you have to give your dog like the biggest thank you.
Oh yeah, he's a matchmaker. We always talk about that. Even like, so he had a dog, because yeah, he was the dog part, but his dog is now like attached to me, and my dog is so attached to him. Like my dog is right now sitting on the couch with him, and his dog is next to me right now.
That's so sweet.
Yeah, and like, I mean, it's one of those things where when you're not looking, you find it. Like I wasn't going to the dog park being like, oh, let me find like a super handsome man to date. I just went to the dog park because I was in my house so upset, and I was like, it's too hot to run. I don't have a gym membership. What can I do?
Take your doggy to the dog park.
Yep.
So when So has he always been like? I remember in a cycle class, I was actually thinking about this, and I was like, I just wonder, has he always been just super understanding? Because I know that a huge reason you've shared why you cycle is because it's something that your first husband loved,
Yep.
and then also during those hard times, like the week that your first husband passed away, having that support is great. But have you guys ever had any struggles through that?
It's really weird, because like people think this is like the weirdest thing. I talk about fitness through grief. So when I was really upset, I would move my body, because again, like endorphins flowing, gives you the feel good hormones. It makes things better. It's a stress reliever. And so I talk a lot about losing my husband going through grief, needing support when I'm working out, even when I'm running, I'm always like, this feels good. I'm connecting with myself, my feelings. With my current husband, when I get super overwhelmed with like anniversaries, birthdays of my late husband, I don't talk about it a lot with him, but he does know when I am upset and he does give me space. But because I met him just a little less than 2 years from losing my first husband, I did find ways to deal with those surges of emotion. And so he does, the one thing that's really great is he does let me be who I am. And so whenever I feel grief bubbling up, he doesn't pry and pick at it. He kind of just gives me space to deal with it and allows me to open up to him if I choose to. And that's just me personally. That works. That's how I best handle. I don't like to be kind of like raked over a fire, wondering when I'm going to light up. So
Yeah. Is that something that you guys had to discuss, or that just came out like at the beginning and told him, hey, I'm the type of person that just needs space, or I'll come to you whenever I need it? Or was that something that he just understood from the beginning?
it's something that he understood from the beginning. And I think it's because we both, though very, we are different, we're very opposite. We have the same like moral compass and value system. We also handle our frustrations relatively similar. We like to be alone when we're upset. And so, like him, if there's anniversaries, birthdays, dates that arise that are trigger points for him, I know not to be like, grab his hand and soothe him. That he wouldn't like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm the same way.
Yeah,
So it's just like we understood that with each other.
that's awesome. For I know you run this Facebook group for widows. So what would you say to someone who they're they're now starting this new relationship and they feel like that their partner isn't really understanding what they need in that time?
One thing that's really unique, I think, about the widow community is that we understand how precious time is, never to take anything for granted. And it's funny because, like, right now we're in a quarantine because of the coronavirus. And I love memes. I think, like throughout the day I'm always looking at them like, oh, that's a funny one, let me save this and repost it. But a lot of times with like the widow community, like the self quarantining is kind of a joke because we're just like, we've been doing this since our spouse died, what's the big deal? But it's also like I've seen some that's like, oh, people are staying in toxic relationships for years but they can't stay quarantined for like a month. And it's just one of those things. It's just, you can't take time for granted. You have to really kind of extract as much opportunity out of it. And so with this fitness group that I run, we have a ton of people who are now joining it because of the self quarantining and because the gyms are closed and they want to make the most of every day that they have. And so I have people joining it right now. And a lot of them are like, I've gained 35 pounds since my husband died. I've been widowed for 18 months, or I've been widowed. I had one person who recently joined, their husband passed away in November, and they just want to start like getting back on track. And the one thing of advice I always tell people, especially those who are grieving, I'm like, you need to get some headphones, put them in, get the best walking sneakers you got, and hit the streets and carry as much baggage as you can and start sorting through it every step of the way, because that's the best thing you can do. So it's like, allow your mind to kind of be at rest, but also start going through a lot of the complications that are associated with grief, and think about the memories that make you happy, but also understand those memories will also cause a huge wave of sadness along the way as well. And do it, be consistent with it, and don't fear it.
I love that. So there's so many things that I love about it. The first thing is not avoiding feelings. I'm huge on not avoiding them. I think there's some people, I mean, especially in society, there's so much pressure on being happy.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, be happy, stay positive, be strong. But really, I mean, that's just avoidance. So you're not doing anything good for yourself. And just that metaphor and kind of, telling new grievers or people in your group to carry the baggage and sort through it step by step. I think I'm a huge visual person, so I'm picturing it as I go, and it's like beautiful. That's a beautiful metaphor. I'm probably going to steal it from you. Cuz it relates in so many different ways. It's just like emotions in general. Carry them with you and sort it out. And the best thing, and then the fact that you're carrying it and going for a walk and doing it, it's just, you're also, while you're creating all those happy hormones, and so it's going to come out positive. You're doing a positive thing and it's creating something positive for you. So I love that.
Was it moving meditation? It's productive. And also it gives back at the same time. So I also do online coaching, and I always joke around that I'm like the worst online coach, probably because I give most of my advice for free. So I don't make any money. But one thing is that a lot of people are always like looking for like the secret to losing weight and like feeling good about themselves. And a lot of times it's not about the number on the scale. It's just about getting out there and doing something that you don't normally do. And that can create a wealth of feelings that make you feel positive about yourself. And so there's a lot of bereaved people who are stuck in their house because they don't want to go out. Because I know that when my husband died, when I went out, I felt very transparent. Like people, complete strangers, could see through me and see that I was a widow, even though it's like I'm not wearing a scarlet letter, like it's not marked on my head. Like no one could know what I was going through unless I talked about it. But it's one of those weird phenomenons that you think everybody knows and can see it.
Mm-hmm.
But when you go out walking, if you go out by yourself, headphones in, you just really focus in on what's in between your head. That's it. It's like, let the music fuel you, let the thoughts pour out of you. And the benefit is that you're also burning calories. So if you're not normally a walker, you're going to end up losing weight simply because you added that touch in there. So it creates a little bit of your body becomes a furnace.
Yeah.
And you can begin to see a wealth of positivity by losing inches, losing weight simply by walking. And plus it helps your mental health.
Yeah, that's great. Before we end, I do want to ask you, what is one thing that you wish somebody told you while you were going through this in the beginning stages that you wish you knew at that time?
Don't move to Alabama. No, just kidding. Just kidding. Man, that's like a loaded question. I heard a lot of like awesome advice when I was first going through it. And one of the things that I think would be just be gentle with yourself. And that's also something that carries over into multiple parts of your life. Like I was so hung up on trying to become someone else when I was in the first year of grief. Like I use this metaphor. I was running a lot because I was running away from myself, and I was running towards becoming someone that I didn't like, someone new. But really, I was still the person I was, just a little bit different. But you can really trample on people when you are not gentle with yourself. And so if you are not kind to yourself, you're not going to be kind to people around you. And I lost a lot of friends first year. I was not a very gentle person with myself, and I was not gentle with people who were close around me as well. So some of my really good friends I'm no longer friends with, and I do regret that. And so that would be my biggest piece of advice, would be gentle with yourself, because how you treat yourself will be how you treat the people around you. and also connecting it with postpartum, because those are two massive life changes, losing a husband and then having a baby, like death to life. Right now, I keep reminding myself I have to be gentle with myself because, again, I need to be kind to myself, even though there's a million things I would love to change. But I have this little person who is so reliant on me. And if I'm not good to myself, I can't be good for him. And so I try really hard to make sure that mentally I'm being kind to myself and I'm doing everything that I did when my husband passed away. I'm doing it right now. And there is a lot of symmetry with it, because when I'm not feeling great about myself, or if I'm not feeling great mentally, I take my baggage and I hit the streets, except this time I have a stroller that's getting pushed along the way too.
You are like so good with metaphors and advice. It's like, can I just get into your brain and collect them all?
Yes.
So, yeah, I think that's great advice for anyone. I've actually never heard that before. Being kind to yourself. And it's so true, because I started thinking about all the times that I wasn't kind to myself, and then I kind of like did a quick thought on how I treated others, and it wasn't good.
Yeah.
And it did ruin a few relationships just by, and you don't even, and it doesn't even come to mind because you're just worried about yourself and your feelings, but it's actually damaging like everything around you, like a hurricane.
Oh yeah. It's like the don't bite the hand that feeds you. And that's why, like, when I teach classes like in Cycle Bar, I always talk about the support system. Like, always think about the people who are supporting you, whether it's like the person next to you or someone at home. It's like, always respect the support system, because without it, we just crumble. And so it's a big thing in my life that having good relationships with the people who really have been there through the thick and thin, the weeds, the hurricanes, all the really tough times. I always am paying gratitude to them, because without them, like I always say, I wouldn't be here.
Yeah. I do want to ask you another question. Your late husband, I know you've touched on it a couple times, but you cycle because he loved to cycle.
It's like a huge backstory, and it's okay. So my husband and I, he loved to bicycle. I did not bike. Like, I did not like to go biking. When I was 6 years old, I was learning how to bike, and I fell off my bike and I scraped my hand and my arm really badly. And I looked at my dad. I said, I'm never doing this again. And it's like one of those things where, like, kids say a lot of things and they don't mean it. Like, I meant it. I never biked ever again after that moment. Like, I scraped myself so bad, I never biked again. So then I started dating my husband. He was like, let's go for a bike ride in Central Park. And I was like, nope, I'm not going to do that, because I swore when I was 6 years old I was never going to bike again.
That's
And
real trauma right there.
yeah, it's like you never know how damaged you are until. And so he was just like, are you serious? And I was like, I'm never biking again. I said it, and I'm not going to do it. But it was such a big part of his life. So he had completed the Century Tour, which is a Live Strong fundraiser. So you bike ride for 100 miles for Live Strong, and it's a fundraiser. He did it. He was so proud of it. And I like, it was one of those things I was like, wow, like, that's an amazing accomplishment. Like, how'd you do it? Like, of course I know how he did it. But he wanted to go cycling with me so badly because it's something he loved to do. And he introduced me to Cycle for Survival, which is a indoor cycling fundraiser for Memorial Sloan Kettering, which was the hospital he was going to. And so I set up a fundraiser at the university I was working for at the time, which was Sacred Heart University, to do a Cycle for Survival event there. And he was like kind of helping me set it up. And so we did spin classes together because we did that event. And then afterwards he was like, let's go take a spin class at the New York Sports Club. Let's go take a spin class at YMCA. Let's go take a spin, like, and I was like, okay. And we did it few and far between. It wasn't like every week. It was maybe like one, like what do you want to do? I don't know. I don't want to do anything. Let's go take a spin class. Okay. It would be like once a month.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, he came over to my house and he saw that there was like this old Trek bike. And he was like, can we please bring this bike back to New York? He lived in New York City. So I was like, okay, fine. So we brought the bike back to New York and he was like, we're going to get you on this bike. And I was like, no, you're not. So he taught me how to ride a bike, like, and I cannot tell you, you can forget how to ride a bike. So I was like not balancing very well on this bike.
Like a baby deer on ice.
Oh yeah, it was that. It was just like I was like leaning to the left. He was like holding me up, trying to center me. People were like coming out of their brownstones to look at me, and it was just so embarrassing. And we did that for like a weekend, but then I picked it up. It was fine, and we started going on bike rides together. And he ended up buying me a bike because he would bike to his work, which was 7 miles from where we lived in Brooklyn. And I started working in New Jersey, so the metro to get to Jersey was really close to, was like en route to where he worked. So we would bike to the metro station together, and I would hop on and go to work. And it was just one of those things that like brought him so much joy to cycle, and then to include me into that part of his life was like, I think Christmas for him. Like every day he was so excited when we went cycling together.
Oh.
We ended up biking together, and it was funny because with our getting married, our wedding gifts, a lot of people bought us like emblems of like tandem bikes, and it was like George and Julia, and I still have all that stuff. And someone bought me a cutting board of a bicycle, and it was like George and Julia. And it's one of those things where it's like he loved it so much that when he died, it was very serendipitous that one of my colleagues would invite me to Soul Cycle. It was like, I just think you might like this. And when I was there, I like felt like he was with me also. So I kept going back. That first class I remember was the hardest thing on the planet. I was like, wow, I'm really out of shape. But I felt him and I felt really good about it. So I kept going back.
Yeah. Did you have any like hesitance to go when your friend invited you for that first time?
No, because I was really out of my mind. It was February, so it was, I like am so with him. So he died. It was like under 3 months of widowed, and I was like so out of my mind. And I can't describe the feeling of being out of your mind very well because you don't know until you're in it. Mm-hmm. You're just like, you're in this constant manic state, like very spontaneous. You don't really think things through very well. And I remember I had practice went well, and I was just like sitting around with my assistant coach, and this other coach came in and was like, do you guys want to do this tomorrow? And I was like, yeah, I do. And I didn't even think anything, like I didn't even second guess it being like, oh, is it going to be hard? I just was like, yeah, I'm going to show up. Let's go.
That's probably the best way to be, especially to get through it, and then that being your motivation to get on. Because I remember when you first shared that story, or like a story similar, not that one, and you said that you cycle because he loved to cycle.
Yep.
And I remember thinking like, I don't know if I could do that. Like, I don't know if, I mean, Dustin loves karaoke. So like it's like it's his thing. It's his jam. I mean, seriously. But if he were to pass away, I don't know if I could go to karaoke. I would, I mean, maybe I would. Maybe I'd be, manic out of my mind and just go and do it. But
it's like, it's crazy because it's funny. My first husband, he also liked to karaoke, but I have like a voice of a seagull. But there's just certain aspects that I think you just decide to pull from. Like he loved cycling. He also was a fantastic musician, but it was one of those things that I wasn't going to pick up a guitar to learn how to play guitar. It's one of those things where it's like we had done cycling together. So it was one of those things where it was like, oh, we did this together. So it's not far reaching.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story and being open and transparent through it all.
Thanks for having me. I was so excited when you reached out.